Jews and Arabs have been at war for 4,000 years, and the Bible tells you exactly why. Everyone thinks this is a modern dispute over land, but it is not. If this was just about borders, it would have been solved centuries ago. Every generation, world leaders draw new maps. They sign historic treaties, and they shake hands for the cameras, and every single time, it ends in fire. Why does every ceasefire collapse? Because the world is trying to solve a spiritual collision with a political treaty. The true origin of this hatred is buried deep in the book of Genesis. It is an ancient, unresolved fracture that redrew the map of the earth. In this video, we will reveal the true biblical origin of this war and why human politics can never fix it. To understand why Jews and Arabs are at war, you have to go back to the moment the fuse was lit. And the fuse was not a weapon, it was a promise. Around 2100 BC, in the ancient city of Ur, God made a covenant with Abram. The terms were absolutely extraordinary. God promised him the land of Canaan, stretching from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. God promised him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand on the seashore. And God promised him a legacy that through his offspring, every nation on earth would be blessed. Genesis chapter 12, verses 15 and 17 record the terms of this covenant in detail. The ceremony that sealed the covenant was unlike anything in ordinary human contracts. In Genesis 15, God instructed Abraham to take a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a young pigeon. He was told to cut the larger animals in half and arrange the halves opposite each other. In the ancient Near East, this was a standard covenant ritual. Both parties would walk between the animal pieces, essentially saying that they would become like these animals if they broke the oath. But when the moment came, Abraham fell into a deep sleep. A thick and dreadful darkness covered him completely. Only God, represented by a smoking firepot and a blazing torch, passed between the pieces. Abraham did not walk. God walked alone. This was not a partnership. This was a unilateral, unconditional divine commitment. God was staking his own name on the promise. There was only one massive problem. Abraham had no son, and his wife Sarah was barren. In the ancient Near East, a patriarch without an heir was not merely unfortunate. He was considered cursed. Without a son, a man's name vanished from the tribal records. His land reverted to strangers, and his wealth was absorbed by distant relatives. His legacy evaporated like water on desert stone. In the honor and shame culture of Mesopotamia, barrenness was not a private grief. It was a public disgrace that followed a family like a shadow. Every year that passed without a child was a silent, grinding humiliation. It corroded Abraham's standing in the community and his confidence in the God who had made the promise. And this was not a short wait. God did not explain the delay, and he gave no timeline. He did not provide updates. He simply asked Abraham to trust him and wait. And Abraham waited. He waited through his 60s, his 70s, and his early 80s. 25 years of absolute silence, 25 years of watching other men raise their sons into warriors. His own tent remained quiet. He held a promise that produced nothing visible, nothing tangible, and nothing he could show to the skeptics around him. By the time Abraham reached 86 years old, the patience finally broke. Sarah came to him with a proposal. It was not unusual. It was a legally recognized practice throughout the ancient Near East. Clay tablets discovered at the archaeological site of Nutsi in modern northern Iraq confirm this. A barren wife could offer her servant as a surrogate to produce a legal heir on her behalf. Sarah was not inventing a scheme. She was following the accepted law of the land. She offered her Egyptian servant, a woman named Hagar, to Abraham. The logic was simple. If God would not provide the miracle, they would manufacture one. Abraham agreed to the plan. In that single decision, driven by decades of exhaustion, cultural pressure, and the unbearable weight of silence from God, he attempted to produce a divine promise through human effort. They thought they were just securing a bloodline, but they had no idea what they had just done. They had just given birth to a civilization that would bring their actual descendants to the brink of annihilation. Hagar conceived almost immediately, and the moment she did, the household fractured. Hagar, now carrying the heir of the most powerful patriarch, began to look at Sarah with open contempt. The power dynamic had completely shifted. The servant who once lowered her eyes in deference now held the one thing her mistress could never produce. Sarah, humiliated by the servant she herself had offered, turned on Hagar with cruelty so severe that the pregnant woman fled into the desert alone. An angel found Hagar near a spring on the road to Shur, the ancient trade route running toward Egypt. The angel told her to return to Abraham's camp, but the angel also delivered a prophecy about the child she carried that would prove devastatingly accurate across millennia. Genesis chapter 16 verse 12 says he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. That single verse reads like a headline pulled from every century of Middle Eastern history. The boy would be named Ishmael, meaning God hears. Hagar returned to the camp, and Ishmael was born. Abraham was 86 years old. He held the boy and believed with every fiber of his being that this was the fulfillment of the promise. For 13 years, Abraham raised Ishmael as his only son. 13 years of bonding and training him in the ways of the covenant God. 13 years of assuming that this child was the answer he had been waiting for. Abraham loved Ishmael, and that is not speculation. When God later told Abraham that the covenant would pass to a different son, Abraham's response was immediate and raw. Genesis chapter 17 verse 18 records his desperate plea. He begged God, saying if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. But God's answer split the world in two. In Genesis 17, God said he heard Abraham and would surely bless Ishmael. He promised to make him fruitful, increase his numbers, and make him the father of 12 rulers and a great nation. But God said his covenant would be established with Isaac, whom Sarah would bear next year. 2 sentences, 2 destinies. One son received a blessing, prosperity, multiplication, and earthly greatness. The other son received the covenant, the land, the lineage, the law, and ultimately the Messiah. The blessing was generous, but the covenant was everything. This was not an arbitrary decision. Over 2,000 years later, the Apostle Paul would explain exactly why in his letter to the Galatians, chapter 4. Paul called Ishmael the son, born according to the flesh, and Isaac the son, born according to the promise. He said Hagar and Sarah represented 2 covenants. One covenant produced slavery, and the other produced freedom. Paul was explicit. The child produced by human effort and the child produced by divine miracle could never share the same inheritance. This was not cultural bias. This was the foundational logic of how God operated. His covenant could not rest on what human hands had manufactured. The Nutsi tablets confirmed that Sarah followed the legal customs of her era. But legality is not the same as divine authorization. What was lawful in Mesopotamia was catastrophic in the economy of God. Abraham had tried to build God's future with his own hands, and the structure he built would never stop cracking. One son was given a blessing, and the other was given the blueprint to the earth. The collision between the two sons was about to tear the family apart. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90. The miracle that God had promised, the biologically impossible and supernaturally delivered child, had finally arrived. And the household that was already fractured now became an absolute war zone. Genesis 21 records the breaking point. During a feast celebrating Isaac's weaning, Sarah saw Ishmael, now a teenager, mocking the toddler Isaac. The Hebrew word used is metzahek, and scholars remain divided on whether it implies ridicule, bullying, or something much darker. What is not disputed is Sarah's reaction. She demanded that Abraham expel both Hagar and Ishmael from the camp permanently. The text says that this matter distressed Abraham greatly. This was his firstborn son, the boy he had raised for over 14 years. This was the child he had begged God to bless. And now his wife was demanding that he cast him into the desert to die. God told Abraham to listen to Sarah. The next morning, Abraham rose early and loaded bread and a skin of water onto Hagar's shoulders. He placed the boy beside her and sent them away. Picture the terrifying reality of this. The Negev desert, temperatures exceeding 45 degrees Celsius, sand stretching to every horizon. No shelter and no settlement for days of walking. A single skin of water for a woman and a growing boy. The water ran out, the bread was gone, and the boy began to collapse. Hagar placed Ishmael under a small desert bush. Then she walked roughly the distance of a bow, shot away, far enough that she would not have to watch her son die. She sat down in the sand and wept. Then the angel of God called to her from heaven, telling her not to be afraid. God had heard the boy crying. The angel told her to lift him up and take him by the hand, for God would make him into a great nation. God opened her eyes, and she saw a whale. The boy drank, and the boy lived. But something extraordinary had already happened earlier in this story that almost no one discusses. In Genesis 16, during Hagar's first flight into the desert, before Ishmael was even born, Hagar did something unprecedented in all of Scripture. She gave God a name. She called him El Roi, the God who sees me. The rejected slave, the used surrogate, the discarded woman wandering in the wilderness is the first person now in the entire Bible to name the Creator. Not Abraham, so not any patriarch before her, but Hagar. She said, "You are the God who sees me." And the well where she stood was named Bir Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. God did not merely tolerate Hagar. God revealed himself to her in a way that he had not yet revealed himself to anyone. God saw her when the people who used her looked right through her. God saved her son, and God promised her a nation. The tragedy of this story is not that God rejected Ishmael. The tragedy is that the covenant had to go through a different line, and the wound never healed. Ishmael survived the desert, and he grew strong. Genesis 21 says that God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the wilderness of Paran and became an archer and a desert warrior. His mother found him a wife from the land of Egypt, connecting him back to her roots. And from Ishmael came 12 sons, 12 princes, exactly as God had promised Abraham. Genesis 25 records their names: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These 12 settled across the vast eastern wilderness, From Havilah to Shur, near the border of Egypt, they became tribal chiefs and they became nations. They would spend the next 3 millennia inhabiting the land surrounding the Promised Land, a permanent presence of the brother who was sent away. The wound did not close with time. It mutated. 1 generation after Abraham, God's covenant passed from Isaac to his son Jacob. Jacob was later renamed Israel. But Isaac had twin sons, Jacob and Esau, and the rivalry between them would deepen the fracture that Abraham had created. Esau was the firstborn, and by every custom of the ancient Near East, the birthright belonged to him. But Genesis 25 records that Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of stew, a decision so reckless that the text says he despised his birthright. Later in Genesis 27, Jacob deceived their aging blind father Isaac and stole the patriarchal blessing that was meant for Esau. When Esau discovered the theft, Genesis records that he burst out with a loud and bitter cry, begging his father to bless him too. Isaac's hands were trembling, and his reserves were spent. The primary blessing was gone. He had nothing left to give. Esau left with a vow to kill his brother, and then he made a decision that would reshape the geopolitical map of the ancient world. Genesis 28 records that Esau went to Ishmael and married Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael. This was not a romantic coincidence. This was a calculated strategic alliance. The rejected twin deliberately merged his bloodline with the rejected firstborn. 2 men who believed their inheritance had been stolen from them united their families, their anger, and their descendants into a permanent opposition force. Esau became the father of the Edomites. They settled in the rugged mountainous terrain of Seir, to the south of the Dead Sea, the region known today as southern Jordan. And the hostility between Edom and Israel did not fade with time. It intensified across centuries. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, Edom refused them passage. When Israel established its kingdom, Edom rebelled relentlessly against every king who tried to hold them. When Babylon finally destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC, it was the Edomites who stood on the surrounding hills and cheered. The prophet Obadiah records their absolute treachery. He wrote that, on the day they stood aloof, while strangers carried off wealth and cast lots for Jerusalem, they were just like the foreigners. The wound Abraham created was not theoretical. It drew real blood across every generation. The Ishmaelite princes spread across northern Arabia. There were other branches of Abraham's fractured family tree that filled in the remaining geography. Moab and Ammon, born from Abraham's nephew Lot and his daughters after the destruction of Sodom, settled to the east in the territory of modern Jordan. They were part of the same broken family system. They were additional wounded relatives occupying the territory directly adjacent to the Promised Land. Look at the map. Israel sat in the center, Edom to the south, Ishmael to the southeast, Moab and Ammon to the east, and Philistia to the west. Every single neighbor was a relative. Every single border was a family wound. The Promised Land was completely encircled by the descendants of Abraham's extended broken family. Unresolved family trauma had become international foreign policy. These wars were never about water rights or grazing land. They were about inheritance. They were about which son carried the mandate of heaven. And the question was never settled, because it was never a question that human beings could settle. The battle lines were permanently drawn in the sand, but the blood feud was about to mutate into something far darker. It became a theological war for the soul of the very land God had promised. Fast forward roughly 2.5 millennia from Abraham. In the 7th century AD, in the Arabian Peninsula, a prophet named Muhammad founded a new faith that would reshape the spiritual map of the world. Islam traced its spiritual ancestry directly to Abraham, not through Isaac, but through Ishmael. In Islamic tradition, it was Ishmael, not Isaac, whom Abraham placed on the altar of sacrifice on the mountain. The Kaaba in Mecca, the holiest site in Islam, was believed to have been built by Abraham and Ishmael. They built it together as a house of worship dedicated to the one God. Every year, millions of Muslims circle the Kaaba during the Hajj pilgrimage, retracing what they believe are the footsteps of Abraham and his firstborn son. This was not merely a cultural narrative. This was a foundational theological claim that restructured the entire identity of a civilization. Islam adopted and elevated the lineage of Ishmael as its spiritual anchor, positioning Ishmael as the true heir of Abraham's faith and the rightful carrier of the covenant promise. The implications were staggering. Two of the world's largest civilizations, Judaism and Islam, now traced their spiritual identity back to the exact same father. Both claimed the exact same patriarch. Both revered the exact same God of Abraham, and both believed with absolute theological certainty that they held the exclusive divine mandate to the same land. Now, a crucial distinction must be made. Not all modern Arabs are direct genetic descendants of Ishmael. The Arab world is vast and ethnically diverse, encompassing populations that predate Ishmael and lineages that have no genealogical connection to Abraham. Islam itself was not founded until over 2,000 years later. This is not a war over DNA. This is a war over spiritual identity, over who carries the true inheritance of Abraham's covenant with God. And that war cannot be resolved by a border commission. It must also be said that the narrative of perpetual uninterrupted bloodshed is not historically accurate. There have been centuries under the Islamic Golden Age in Al-Andalus and under the Ottoman Empire, where Jews and Arabs lived in a coexistence that put Christian Europe to shame. Jewish scholars thrived in Muslim courts, and Jewish communities found refuge in Muslim lands when they were slaughtered across Europe. The history is far more nuanced than the modern headlines suggest. But the theological fault line never closed. It was never resolved. It was always beneath the surface, waiting for the conditions to erupt. And in the 20th century, with the establishment of the modern state of Israel in 1948, everything changed. On the land both civilizations claimed by divine right, the fault line cracked open with a violence that has not stopped since. And here is where the Bible delivers a revelation that should stop every viewer in their tracks. It is a terrifying prophecy hiding in plain sight. If you want to understand the exact ancient text that predicted this modern coalition and discover the hidden truth of history, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Psalm 83, written approximately 3,000 years ago, records a prayer of the psalmist Asaph against the enemies conspiring to destroy Israel. The psalm describes a confederation of nations that have formed a pact with a single objective. Their goal is to wipe Israel from the map so that its name is remembered no more. And the psalmist lists the members of this coalition by name. Listen carefully to this ancient list: Edom, the Ishmaelites; Moab, the Hagrites; Ammon, Gebal, Amalek, Philistia, the people of Tyre, and even Assyria has joined them. Read that list again. Edom, the descendants of Esau, the rejected twin; the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, the rejected firstborn; Moab and Ammon, the descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew. The Hagarites, the people associated with Hagar, the expelled mother. Every single name on that list is a branch from Abraham's extended family tree, or an immediate neighbor of the Promised Land. The psalm was written approximately 3,000 years ago, and the coalition it describes maps directly onto the geopolitical reality surrounding modern Israel today. The Bible did not predict this conflict in vague symbolic language. It named the exact participants millennia before they organized as recognizable nations and alliances. This is not an interpretation. This is a list written on ancient parchment, preserved for 3,000 years. Every name on it corresponds to a real geographic and ethnic group that has opposed Israel in documented history. The Psalm 83 coalition is not a coincidence. It is a pattern that has repeated across every era of recorded history, from the wars of the judges to the Babylonian exile. It continues right into the modern conflicts of the 20th and 21st centuries, and the biblical text points toward only one ultimate resolution. It will not happen at a negotiating table in Geneva or New York, but at the return of the Messiah to the city of Jerusalem. But there is one scene in the Bible that almost no one talks about. Genesis 25, verse 9. Abraham dies, and the text says something extraordinary. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. After decades of separation, after the expulsion, after the desert, and after the wound that split the world in half, the two brothers came back together to bury their father. In that moment, they were not the patriarch of the Jews and the patriarch of the Arabs. They were just two sons standing over the body of the man they both loved. Jewish scholars have noted a crucial detail in the text. Isaac is named first, even though Ishmael was the elder brother. Tradition interprets this as a sign that Ishmael yielded to Isaac and that he accepted his brother's place in the covenant. It was a quiet, profound act of reconciliation. And according to the ancient Jewish principle, the deeds of the fathers are prophetic signs. This moment was not just history, it was prophecy. And in our own time, something remarkable has happened. In 2020, several Arab nations, including the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, signed historic peace agreements with Israel. The name they chose for those treaties was not a political title. They called them the Abraham Accords. For the first time in modern history, diplomacy did not focus on the conflict. It deliberately invoked the common father. It was a public acknowledgement that despite 4,000 years of division, the origin is the exact same. This war will not end at a negotiating table. But the terrifying truth is that you and I are making the exact same mistake Abraham made right now. Let me step back from the history for a moment. Everything you just heard traces back to one moment, one night, and one man who could not wait for God. The rockets, the empires, the 4,000 years of bloodshed, the coalitions, and the prophecies. Abraham did not set out to start a civilizational war. He was not a villain. He was a man who had waited decades for a promise that seemed impossible. He was tired, and he was old. He was surrounded by a culture that offered him a perfectly legal, perfectly rational alternative to waiting. So, he took it. He took matters into his own hands and manufactured a solution that God never authorized. And 4,000 years later, the shrapnel of that decision is still tearing through the sky over Jerusalem. I need to ask you a question, and I need you to sit with it honestly. What is the Ishmael you are building right now? What promise has God made you that is taking so long that you have decided to help him out? What are you forcing into existence with your own hands because you are exhausted from waiting? Is it a relationship you know is not right? but you are tired of being alone? Is it a financial shortcut you are taking because the legitimate path is too slow? Is it a career you are building on a foundation you know God did not authorize because the promised one has not materialized? You cannot stand the silence any longer. Is it a decision you made last month, last year, or 10 years ago that you have been trying to make works ever since? You are pouring time, energy, and faith into something that God never breathed on. Look at what happens when human beings try to help God fulfill His promises. Look at the carnage, and look at the generational trauma. Look at the wars that never end. Look at the Negev desert, where a mother sat waiting for her son to die. Look at the hills of Edom, where cousins cheered as Jerusalem burned. Look at the rockets still streaking across the same sky tonight. Abraham's impatience did not just affect his family. It redrew the borders of the earth. When you build what God did not breathe on, you do not get a miracle. You get a war. A war you will have to fight for the rest of your life, and a war your children will inherit. It is a war that compounds with every generation until the damage is beyond any human ability to repair. But here is the grace buried inside this tragedy. God did not abandon Ishmael in the desert. God saw Hagar, and God heard the boy crying. God opened her eyes to find water. God blessed the son of human effort, even as He preserved the covenant for the son of divine promise. God's mercy is wide enough to cover the mistakes, but His covenant still requires trust. It still requires waiting and surrendering the timeline to the only one who can see the end from the beginning. Drop Ishmael. Whatever you are manufacturing in God's name without God's breath, release it right now. Trust the timing of Isaac. The miracle is coming, but it will come on God's schedule, not yours. And when it arrives, it will carry the weight of something no human effort could ever have produced. Abraham could not wait for God, and 4,000 years later, the world is still paying for that one night. If you are exhausted from trying to force God's hand in your own life, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me your story. You are absolutely not alone in this struggle. Share this video with someone who desperately needs to hear the truth today. Keep trusting the process. Keep waiting for the promise to arrive, and I will see you in the next one.